better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change.
Matt,
your
I want
life.
to talk to you, and this is this is a bit of a touchy subject, but I think it's time that we talk about it. I want to open our table relationship up to to more people.
Rob, I don't know if
I'm
I'm ready.
I know it sounds like a lot, but I think that there's room at this table for more people. I think it's just like it's gotten kind of stale. So I just we want you to consider it an open table is all that I'm saying. I just just give it a shot, Matt. Just give it a shot.
You're saying this will like, I don't know, enhance the time we have together?
It's exciting. I think it could be energizing. It could be, I really think that this could really like spice up the table relationship.
Okay, Rob, let's open our table. It's Dungeon Master of None.
I'm Dungeon Master Rob.
I'm Dungeon Master Matt, and we're here with an open table expert, Dungeon Master Andy.
Yes, I am. I am here to spice up both y'all's lives. And looking forward to it because I really enjoy playing kind of open table games, and I would love to spread the gospel about it to other people as well.
Yeah, should we talk about we have discussed the open table or touched on it a lot of times, but should we sort of like lay out what this is, like, establish what we mean when we say an open table game, because it is both a very old idea, but also in some ways a new idea. It's been around for a while, but like people are sort of like circling back around to it.
Yeah. So the most elemental definition of an open table that I can think of is the idea that you run a game where basically anybody can show up and sit down and play. A closed game would be where you've got your circle of 5 people who are scheduled to come and show up at a particular time, and you play your game. And, everyone has lives, everyone has work schedules. Sometimes you're able to get everyone together. Sometimes you can't. You try and reschedule. It's a big bummer. An open table concept says, well, maybe you don't have that same fixed 5 people. Maybe you throw it open to 24 people, and whoever shows up that night shows up, and the rest of the people don't. And then you play with that group of players. Or maybe it's the kind of the situation like I frequently do at conventions, where I have a walk-up event, and I say, well, anyone who wants to come and sit down and play can. And so you really have no idea going in who the other players are going to be. That's the fundamental basis of what an open table is to me.
Something that comes up a lot, and let's just address it now. Is there a difference between a West Marches campaign and an open table game? They're often used interchangeably, I found, and my impression is that they're not exactly the same thing, but it's something that I keep running into, that people keep bringing up when I mention open table.
Okay, so like one is a subset of the other. The West Marches concept, I think it was like 15 years ago, Ben Robbins wrote a good blog post that kind of blew up, that talked about his idea of running what he was calling a West Marches campaign. And the idea behind that was it is an open table type deal. It's the kind of thing that doesn't necessarily have a fixed roster of players. But there's another component to it too, which is that it happens, well, there's several more components. It's something that happens, regularly, like maybe a weekly type deal, and you don't have the same players at the table, but you do have this aspect of communication where last week's group somehow communicates to this week's group what they did and what they said and what they saw. That's part of it. Another part of it that's super important about West Marches is that, well, it's called West Marches because often the west part of the game world is like the last unexplored area, and the game is largely about exploration. That's what it is about, more than going and looting and killing, although there's plenty of that too. But in a West Marches campaign, you're really kind of exploring this fog of war game world and slowly opening it up until you realize what everything is, and hopefully divulging part of what you learn to the other players so they can benefit from what you're doing. And so the West Marches idea really kind of blew up in 2008 and was really hot for a few years, I would say, with a lot of people vowing, oh, that's just the coolest idea. I'm going to run my own West Marches campaign. I don't know how many people actually did do that, but a lot of people talked about doing it. And, ultimately, the thing about the West Marches campaign style is that it's not really a super new idea, because ultimately, if you get back to the Dave Arneson table and the Gary Gygax original campaign, that's pretty much how they ran their game. They had a large group of people who were involved in these games, and they wouldn't get them all around the table at the same time. They would get kind of whoever showed up, and then there would be this whole kind of, half of the fun was playing the game and the other half was kind of sitting around with people and telling tales of, spreading the lore of what we saw. And so anyway, that maybe it's not so much developing something new as rediscovering and putting a new polish on a fun style of play.
We talked about like what this is in basic terms, right? It's the opposite of a dedicated table. You run a night, whoever wants to can show up. Both of you experienced open table game masters. Like, why would you want to do this? We talked about scheduling. What are the advantages? What do you gain? What do you lose?
Well, I'll cover my side first, Rob. I come at it from the standpoint of a convention organizer. As I've said in other versions of this podcast, both Matt and I were involved in organizing a game convention here in Houston called OwlCon. And by the way, shameless plug, OwlCon will be happening this month, February 25th through 27th at Rice University. Go to owlcon.com.
If you're in the Houston area, it's fun. I've run games there. I've played games there. It's a fun con. Check it
Anyhow, for many years, both me and Matt were organizers of this con, and I was responsible for organizing all the gaming. And one of the things I saw that was a huge bummer was that when people's games cancel. So all too often a GM will flake out, or they'll get sick, or only one person shows up for the game and that's not enough to run the game. And so, there's 6 game slots of time at OwlCon. And so if even one of them cancels, that's like a sixth of the con that you paid good money for to go to that isn't happening. And so I saw an awful lot of disappointed people kind of drifting around at loose ends. Oh, I don't have anything I could do. And so what I felt like I needed to do I think I decided to do this in 2016, was create an event that was kind of a easy drop-in event where people who don't have anything to do could wander by my table and could sit down, and within a few minutes they could be playing some sort of role-playing game. And then if they decided that they wanted to get up and go somewhere else or have lunch, or if they needed to go to their next gaming event in an hour, they could do that. And it was relatively straightforward and easy to do. And so I came at it from a standpoint of wanting to have a game that intentionally could have people come in and come out on a short-term basis, or a long-term if they wanted to stay. And, that you wouldn't consume all of your time getting spun up and invested in the game. You could pretty much just be in there and out of there in minutes. And so that's the origin of my ongoing open game that I actually ran the first instance of at ChupacabraCon in Austin in 2017. And I've run it 2 or 3 times a year ever since at various conventions. It's kind of a floating open table campaign.
For my part, there were a couple of different motivators for why I did this. One is that I have 2 to 3 regular campaigns going at any time, and we meet very infrequently because people are adults and scheduling is difficult, and we all try very hard, but it just sometimes doesn't happen. And they're long running and narrative heavy and a lot of fun and great close-knit groups, but I miss running games sometimes. Sometimes I want to run a game. And so I was trying to find a way that I can, if I have time, which I often end up with weeks where I'm not running anything because my groups aren't getting together, I can just say, hey, I have time. Let's do an open table. Let's do this game. Whoever's available to show up. And the second reason is that I have a lot of people who find out that I have a podcast, that I run these games, and they're like, can I play? How do I play? What's D&D about? I've never done this before, which is great, but I can't exactly invite them to an Invisible Sun game because that's not gonna, it's not a great first introduction to D&D, and so, or to tabletop role-playing games in general. So I was like, wouldn't it be great if I had something simple that you can just drop in, drop out of for both people who are busy and also for people who just want to try it. And, you know, again, I am only just beginning this open table, but initial results are good. That it worked very well, both for people who can't commit to something long term but want to play, and people who've never played before. I had both, and it was a ton of fun. So that was my push to start this open table game.
Yeah, I think what your experience and my experience show is that gaming is kind of convergent, whether it's a convention type setting or a home game type setting. The open table concept works. To kind of support my own open table game, I wound up kind of creating my own TTRPG, and it's called Tales of the Iron League, and you can go to ironleague.org to check out the current beta test state of the rules. But basically, in order to
the show notes,
but basically, in
We'll put it in
order
the show
to
notes.
in order to play test this, I wound up lining up like 4 groups of online players, and we'd play it kind of using Discord, and kind of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I would have a different group on every night. But then I would tell people, hey, but you know, you may be part of the Monday group, but if you have some time available on Tuesday, feel free to dial in and you could play then too. And so we got some cross pollination between the different groups, which is a lot of fun. And but yeah, it works great for online play. It works great for tabletop play. Really, any place that you can effectively game works fine in an open table concept. I don't think there's any downside to it. Now, however, that having been said, there's different styles of games, and open table is definitely has a style to it. And one of the things that you don't have as part of it is like this driven adventure path style story. There isn't a narrative that is laid out that provides a convenient string of beads to hang the framework of an adventure on. Instead, the adventure has to be found within the framework of a larger game world that the DM sets up. And then the players have to make decisions for themselves regarding what to do within this game world. And theoretically, there are many options for exciting adventure that they can have. Some people thrive in that environment. Some people find themselves experiencing paralysis and looking at each other. And in that situation, a good GM needs to find clever ways to spur them to seek out adventure so that you don't have a lame night of gaming.
Listen, I have played in both of y'all's more adventure path driven campaigns, and they were both great. So I think like we should be clear here with the open table. You're kind of like setting aside the idea that, well, in Act 2, the big bad's lieutenant will, you know, there'll be this big confrontation, and then in Act 3, this will happen. You're sort of ceding some of the narrative control to your players for good or ill.
That's how I see it. And it's an experiment. I need to see how it's going to go, but I do tend to run my regular games are pretty narrative heavy. I sort of like naturally create connections and stories and, you know, an overarching narrative. I can't help myself, and it's fun, and I like that, and I will never stop. But I was interested in an open table because as independently as a both a board game and tabletop and video game player, lately I have really liked sort of like emergent gameplay games. Like I really like, one of my favorite games of all time is XCOM 2, and what I love about that I found is that the campaign's the same every time, or the story is the same, right? But I've played through the campaign, I don't know, 3-4 times, and it's actually different because your soldiers are different, what happens, which missions you fail, like, who you end up with, your team evolves based on how your fights go, how your missions go, who survives, what kind of things you find, what kind of injuries they take. And Darkest Dungeon is like this, Dwarf Fortress is like this. I love these games. I love when the game itself is sort of like, you create a narrative out of the things that happen, and it's somewhat random, it's procedurally generated, and you're creating a story within these constraints. And so this was it. This isn't what I had actually set out to do, but when I realized that my open table game could be like this, that I could just sort of like put my players into this a dungeon, this framework, and just like sort of like see what stories emerge, like let them bump up against all of these challenges and kind of like see what comes out of it rather than deciding how I want them to proceed. That was really exciting to me. It's and Eddie and I can talk about this. It's, I think, going to take a lot of different types of prep, but it means that when I'm running the game, I can relinquish control a little bit and sort of like see what happens rather than trying to guide the narrative in a particular direction.
That's absolutely true, but there are a couple of things that you can do still and not just completely go to that player agency driven way to run a game. I find, for instance, that in my open table games, I want to have kind of two tiers of what's going on. There's the incredibly superficial style of play, where if gamers really just want to get together and go into a ruin and kick ass on a bunch of skeletons, that is totally cool, and you can go and do that, and there are ways to do that in a dozen different ways. And some people just want to do that all day. Cool. But I find that it's best. I find that some players, and certainly some DMs such as myself, start to get a little bored if that's all that you do. I find that it's really great to have kind of a deeper dive story behind all of it, where as players kick a bunch of skeletons' asses over multiple sessions and maybe pick up a hint or a clue there, maybe they'll find that there is sort of a larger thing going on, or multiple larger threads that they can pick up on and weave together and maybe start pulling on that rope. And in that sense, you can kind of guide people towards some narratives if they find them interesting, or then they can also go and kill more skeletons. Another thing that I sometimes do is prepare some kind of cutscene type stuff where, sort of drop-in encounters. So I find that it's best to have an open game world that evolves. You don't want it to be completely static. And it's especially cool if player choices affect the direction of the game world. And so in the ChupacabraCon game that I'm running last year, the players came up against some intelligent spiders, and rather than killing them, decided to negotiate with them. And the bottom line is they've founded something called Spider Town, where spiders and humans can trade freely. And they're gonna find out what happens to Spider Town the next time we have that con, because I thought that was a really cool direction the players took it in. So, but having some encounters that you can kind of drop, sort of event-based encounters that wherever people are in the game world, that they can find out, oh, something is happening, and they can either choose to follow that thread and find out what's going on, or they can, again, find more skeletons to kill. And giving them that choice is great. That then you're not leading them by the nose. You are still giving them the opportunity to choose what they will or will not, what gambits they will accept within your game world. But you have the ability to say, well, at least if you want some variety, I'm going to provide it to you.
That's great to hear, because that's exactly what my instincts were to sort of like seed a larger narrative, or a bigger picture, if they want to sort of poke around and engage in that while they are kicking butt and killing skeletons. That's to me sounds like how I would like to engage with it, and it is a little boring if there's nothing bigger going on than here's a dungeon full of monsters or a West Marches full of monsters. So that's cool. Well, Matt had some questions that
All right. I'm going to put you on the spot. Quit dawdling, Rob.
Okay, sorry. I was like, hang on. Should I stop rambling or
yes, stop rambling?
Sorry.
How do you do this thing? How do you do it? How do you prepare an open table game?
That's an important question because there is a fair amount of preparation involved in an open table game. I will say, having run this for a while, that I feel like the amount of work that I put in to prepare it is significantly more than the amount of work that I put in to, say, running a canned dungeon adventure. There's just more preparation that you have to do. Fortunately, I have the kind of personality that I think lends myself towards doing that kind of work. And, other people build model trains or collect porn, and I make mega dungeons. So, but anyway, I think the way that you need to go about it is what you don't have to do is you don't have to, Ed Greenwood style, fill a filing cabinet full of notes about your intricate game world and have every detail, every facet of it already planned out. It would be super great if you did, because then you would be able to respond to any given situation with that information. But it turns out, in my opinion, you don't actually have to have done that. You have to do some legwork where you have to kind of have the broad brushstrokes of your game world and know what different things are happening. And as you get down to the nitty-gritty details of the things that players are likely to run into first, there you probably want to have some more detailed notes so that you're not faking it all the time. Although, frankly, in any of these games, your improvisational DMing skills should be good as well, or you at least will exercise those chops, because you will, from time to time, have to make some stuff up. But I think having some stuff kind of written down about your game world, having some mapping done, having, the important names of places and people, those are important. Obviously, having a variety of adventuring locales prepared, so that when people do wander off hex crawl style, looking around in your game world, that you can, you have things for them to discover and reveal. And having some of that planning done up front is good. I think that as you start getting further away from the things that people are most likely to encounter, your notes can become more spare, more skeletal. And you can fill in those details as you go, as necessary. Definitely more preparation is better, but I don't want anyone to feel like, okay, I've got to dedicate 5 years of my life to preparing this game before I can run it. And that's just not the way it needs to be.
This was another motivator for me. I mean, I'm jealous of Matt because he likes to paint minis, and I would like to paint minis, but for some reason I can't. I just like it doesn't click with me. It doesn't compel me. What I do like to do is doodle maps and dungeons. And I was like, oh, I could just sit and, doodle a dungeon all day, and, that'll be the baseline for, my prep and work on, filling it with monsters and whatever. But I mean, Matt, I will have to report back because I'm in the middle of prep right now. So I can't tell you how far behind I am or whether or not it's been enough, but I like it because it's a different kind of prep than what I usually do for my other games. And so it's been nice to just draw a bunch of maps and dungeons and fill them with monsters. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that works. But it is definitely not less prep than a regular game. It just is a different, or a regular narrative campaign. It's just a different type.
Great opportunity for me to plug my favorite dungeon mapping software, by the way. I like to use Hexographer. And it's kind of it's associated piece of software, Dungeonographer, which is commercially available, but kind of one guy does it, but he does a great job of it. And I like kind of somewhat simplistic hex maps for outdoor hex crawls, and it makes the exact kind of map I like to make. So
He also makes a heraldry designer that it's not bad if you're doing medieval stuff. It's nice. All right, I'm gonna help out all the people who are lazier than Rob and Andy and suggest I did some reading on this. A great example starting dungeon written with the Shadow Dark rules in mind will be linked in the show notes from Kelsey Dion's Shadow Dark system. It's got a starting mid-sized dungeon and some clues about the wilderness outside, and that could be enough to get you started with.
I also for my first session I ran a Shadow Dark. It's a free one that you can find. Lair of the Slime Lord. It is self-contained. It's not attached to anything. But I figured since I didn't know how it was gonna go, I figured I'd throw everybody in and see how they did. So I looked at it's from the Curse Scroll, right, Matt? That first dungeon that these are both really good if you were looking for a starting dungeon for any campaign, but especially for an open table game. Shadow Dark has a bunch of really cool ones that you can definitely lean on.
So a key concept in creating a good open table game is to have a good, safe starting place, right? Mm-hmm. So the adventurers have to start their adventure somewhere. Hopefully they're not starting it right in the middle of the dungeon. Hopefully they're starting it in a place where they can start out, maybe get some equipment, maybe gather some information, and then from that safe place, head out to adventure in a dangerous place. You want them to start someplace safe because you also want them to be able to end somewhere safe. A vital component to any open table game, in my opinion, is to give it kind of the episodic structure where there is sort of a beginning and an end to a certain amount of play. And that way you're not just always starting kind of in media res and players showing up not really knowing where they are when they begin the game. If you can all start in the same place, it's great. But also, I think while some people really relish the style of play of their characters being constantly in danger and short of resources, I feel like what works best for this style of play is for them to have brief bursts of mortal terror followed by rest and recuperation.
And we sort of alluded to this, but we should make it clear. I mean, the open table, as I understand it and as I intend to run it, is that it ends more or less every session with everybody going back to town, because the group that shows up next time may not be the same group that it probably won't be the same group. And so you really need to be doing it in episodes, and they're returning to rest and recuperate, resupply, and then swapping out adventurers to go back into the wilderness or into the dungeon. And this is, I think this is a good structure, but it requires a safe place for them to start out from and for them to return to. I like the short bursts of intensity and terror rather than a constant grueling grind.
So the rolling convention game that I play doesn't really lend itself very well to the episodic style, because conceivably we could be running that game continuously for 14 hours. And so when that happens, I've instituted two rules. One, we're not going to get too fussy about how other new characters drop in on the game, right? So
I like that. Good rule.
If we're in the middle of the adventure and suddenly the four players suddenly notice that there's a fifth adventurer in their midst, we're not going to get too mad about that. We're going to say that's okay. We're going to wave our hands a little bit, say that maybe that aspect of reality isn't something we're going to worry too much about. The other end of it is that when we do end a session, we're maybe not going to be too fussy about role-playing the adventure of them getting through the wilderness to get back home.
Yeah.
We may very well just kind of terminate the adventure in the middle of the dungeon and say, and then they returned home and got back safely. which, sometimes has some challenges, if they're, trapped in a pit, and how do you suddenly teleport home? Yeah, that's tough. But, usually that hasn't been a big problem for me.
Okay, y'all, I've tried to distill all of this advice about open tables down to 5 easy to remember for our listeners who are probably doing laundry and not paying attention. Still need to get something out of this. The 5 S's of the open table: setting, system, scheduling, starting, and stopping. Remember these 5 S's, and you'll go far. So both of y'all have been let's talk about our first S. Both of y'all have been talking about hex crawls and dungeons and traps and adventurers and stuff like that. So like, this obviously like lends itself to a good open table campaign. But do you what if you don't like fantasy stuff? Like, can you do a sci-fi one of these? Can you do a cyberpunk one? What do you have to figure out about the world?
Absolutely. You can do it in many different genres. I read a blog post once about doing a West Marches style campaign using Traveler and exploring worlds in a kind of an unknown, not very much explored section of the galaxy. I think what distinguishes the best kind of setting for open would be that you have kind of designated safe places and dangerous places. And so the safe place is home, and, maybe a place where you can do some shopping and resting. And that's maybe kind of the only safe place. And then from there, there's a designated adventuring area that is definitely dangerous and is wild, is full of monsters, is full of threats and perils. It's not fantasy specific. It can be any game system that you can think of that you could do that in, as long as you generally say, okay, over here where you're starting, that's the safe zone, and you're going to travel from there into the dangerous and have various adventures. But beyond that, I don't feel like there's any hallmarks of a particular style or setting that you have to cling to in order to make an open game work.
Yeah, I gotta agree with that. I was just thinking, for Cyberpunk, the setting, you've got these hot zones in 2045. It could just be you're going from Night City to one of the hot zones, or Night City out to reclaim some of the lost towns. For Shadowrun, there's a bunch of arcologies that are full of monsters. You could be going up and down a mega dungeon full of horrible bug spirits. To my mind, it makes the most sense as a hex crawl type campaign, or as a mega dungeon exploration, something where there is a big dangerous area that needs to be either mapped or cleaned out. But I think it could work with any setting. I think it's most straightforward. Everyone's going to be able to wrap their mind around it in a fantasy setting, but I think it could work. I love the idea, by the way, of a Traveler or a space-based campaign where you're just exploring space hexes instead of land hexes. I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, good use for Stars Without Numbers, sort of a
Yes.
deal. But let's move on to the second of the S's, the system. So because there's such a big player turnover, it's pretty important that you not spend a huge amount of time dithering about rules and that sort of thing. So the best systems to run this on are either systems that are super simple, that are relatively straightforward for people to pick up and run on, or there's something that at least the GM or the DM can walk them through the processes that they need to go through with a minimum of, explaining to them what THACO is. And I think I started out, when I was doing the open table, I started out using Labyrinth Lord, which was the retro clone of 81 vintage basic expert set Dungeons and Dragons. And I did that. That was an intentional choice, because I know that many people just don't like Dungeons and Dragons. It is not their favorite flavor. And yet, for practically every gamer, Dungeons and Dragons is kind of something that everyone sort of knows how to play. They may not love it, but it's something that, if you're at loose ends and you need something to do for 45 minutes, you'll be like, oh, what's this? Oh, it's kind of like D&D. I guess I'll play it. I know how to do
Yeah.
that. And so, there you have the advantage, and you can leverage the fact that people basically know what they're doing, so you can jump right in and make it work, even with a large pool of players. If you have to spend your time explaining the intricacies of the system, that may bog down play, in my opinion.
This is why I picked Shadow Dark for mine, which is also a OSR, OSE type, retro-ish game, because a lot of people, not everybody loves D&D, but everybody knows how it works, basically, right? And that means that they're sitting down to play this open table, and they know if they're going to make an attack roll, they should roll a d20, and they have just like a rough idea of what they need to do, and it greases the skids a little bit. It's very, very simple. There are other systems that I would use, but I could not agree more that it needs to be as stripped down, as simple as possible, or something that the GM can very, very quickly guide people through.
I don't have much legs to stand on because I don't have my own open table, but I'm going to put a plug in for some of the Forged in the Dark systems. Blades in the Dark, the Wild Sea, all of these have safe zones, like your criminal base or your ship, and then huge dangerous zones. And oh hey, only 3 people showed up tonight. I guess that's the only crew of our criminal enterprise that's going on the heist tonight.
I think that's a really good idea, and I am coming from a place where most of my players are D&D players or familiar with D&D, but there are groups, and there's lots of people who are either Powered by the Apocalypse or Forged in the Dark first, who are most familiar with a playbook style of campaign. And if that's the case, then you could absolutely drop them or run an open table in Blaze in the Dark, Forged in the Dark, and I think that would work really well. I think that's a really good idea if you have players who are familiar with that general framework.
But then there are systems you want to avoid. There are systems like Fate,
Yes, there are.
where you have to create tags and interpersonal tags between characters. And yet if you have a character pool that is variable over the course of the gameplay, that breaks down. So you want to think about something, Savage Worlds, or some sort of a game system where the characters are basically standalone, and can any mix of players and characters who show up can make the game go. The third S, scheduling. Oh.
Yeah, do you just put a yard sign out, or post on Facebook Marketplace open table?
I mean, why not? That's sort of how it worked at my con. It was basically just running around and grabbing people who looked at odds and saying, "Hey, come play a game." But yeah, whatever system that you can come up with for putting the game out there to a large group, hopefully, of people, and getting them interested and involved, that's the way to do it. I would say though that there's more to it than just figuring out the time and the place. I think there's a lot of kind of secretarial work maybe associated with managing note taking, because I want to go back to what I talked about when we were talking about West Marches, about the whole communication between groups of players. I really think that's super key, and that's a vital part of it, is that there's kind of this lore built up by the players that gets shared around by all the players, whether they were there or not. I think that's a huge benefit. One of the tools that I use is something called journaling, where all the characters in Tales of the Iron League are given a magic item, and that magic item is a magic book, a magic journal, and its property is that whatever one person writes in it is written in everyone's journal. And so this takes the form of a big bound graph paper book that lives on the table, and if people want to make notes in it or draw maps, they can, and then anyone can read them. Or they don't have to. No one's required to do this. But always, there's some people who love the journal and want to spend their time doodling in the journal, writing in the journal, reading the journal. There's some people who couldn't care less about the journal. That's totally okay. And I've found that in almost every game I've run, there's one person who's like the avid note taker who just can't stand the fact that no one is making notes, and they will kind of take over and do it. So that at least isn't all on the GM. You want to make it such that the players are at least somewhat responsible for that transfer of information and lore. When I was doing this online, we made use of a lot of online tools. We used Google Jamboard, which is so great. And of course, they're getting rid of it. I'm so mad. But Google Jamboard is great because it's kind of group note taking and doodling and map making, and I've been using it for games for years, and now it's going away. But you can use any kind of wiki type software of shared use, and then anyone can make notes on it, and that can be kind of the way that you make the repository of information, and that way the players take on some of that role.
What about just the like basics, right? Like, how do you, maybe obviously there's no one right way to do this, but like, how do you announce when a game is? How do you decide who gets to play, or how, what are your rules for like scheduling?
Well, so there's only one right way to do this, Matt. No, there isn't. But I feel like that at least needs to be DM driven. And the DM should be the one that says, okay, we're going to play on Tuesday. And that's when I'm hosting the game. And, you show up if you can show up, and you don't show up if you can't show up. And that's the way the open table works. That's how you get the mix.
I mean, that's part of the appeal to me about this is with a big enough group, I can say, I have, Friday, whatever, let's play at 7. I have 6 slots, first come, first serve. And that's, part of that I don't love. I hate to ever tell anybody no, but the appeal is, rather than trying to, and this is the problem with my regular games, trying to, even though we have regularly scheduled sessions, they sometimes don't work. And so we have to make sure everybody is there. But and we'll see whether or not I'm able to like stick to this, but the way I have been doing it is I send an email and I say, I would like to play at this time. Please sign this form. I've been using Google Forms to indicate that you are coming, and then we'll see you there. And that seems to work. People seem to respect that approach. I have not had to drop the hammer on anybody yet, but I've been pretty clear that this is how many people I can have at the table. After this many people have signed up, then that's it. You can come next time.
I have sometimes gone to a gaming convention up in the Dallas area called North Texas RPG Con, and the founder of Frog God Games, Bill Webb, runs an open table game there called Mithras Tower, and it's sort of similar to the event that I run. It's an event where people have ongoing characters, and they ask for their character and they play. Bill is an amazing guy in that he can somehow run a table of like 18 players at the same time and somehow make it feel like, no one gets bored. That's an amazing skill. Not everyone can do that. I know I can't. I try and limit my table to no more than 8. But, everyone has their different limits. And yeah, you're right. It kind of have to be a first come, first serve thing. Although if you want to come up with a rotate in, rotate out, hot bunking sort of an approach, then sure, that works too. But yeah, I think you basically set a time and a place and you do it then. And hopefully you get enough players. And if you don't, then you tweak it and try again. But that's got to be on the GM.
Something that was mentioned in that Ben Robbins blog post and in So You Want to Be a Game Master is that, again, in this theoretical world, if enough players get together and they say, we want to play, they can propose a time and organize it themselves. I like that idea. I will tell you, I am having a lot of trouble imagining my friends ever having the wherewithal to do that, but I'm going to tell them that as an option. And I'm very curious to see if anybody is ever going to come up with like, hey, Rob, we got 4 people, 5 people, whatever. Let's play on X day if you're free. That to me sounds great. I would love for them to take, some initiative that may be better for some groups than others, that may work. I think that's a good idea. This is part of like the theory of open table games. In practice, I'm skeptical.
Yeah, for my non-open table games, the most I've ever gotten from anyone is just someone texting me being like, hey, when's the next D&D going to be? Hey. And you know what? I'm very thankful for that. That is super helpful. It reminds me I need to schedule something.
Yeah.
But, that I think that's what we should expect from players.
If they wanted to schedule things, they would be DMs. They wouldn't be players.
Right? All right. S number 4, starting the game. So we've talked about safe spaces and where your group is going to start out. And then they need to have something to do. So typically you're hopefully you have set up a game where your players or your characters that are being played by your players are adventuresome, so that they will be self-motivated to go out and find adventure. But it's good to provide them with some external motivation. In Tales of the Iron League, that external motivation is money. It is a cash enterprise, and that's what they're there to do, is make money. And they start out saying, what am I going to do to make money today? And then they cook up a plan. So usually the way any given session starts is I get a group of players. The players sit down and they review the journal and they think about it and they say, I want to go do X, Y, and Z. And so maybe they come up with a plan. They say X, we're all going to go do X. And then I, as the GM, kind of lay out the situation for them, and I attempt to tempt them into abandoning their original plan. I will say, but look at Q, isn't it shiny? Don't
that.
You think it would be worth doing? And so then they wrangle about it a little bit, and inevitably they either fall for Q or they say, no, get thee behind me, and go on and do X. But at least you want to give them some options. That's the whole idea of the tempting, is not to try and destroy the best laid plans of mice and men, but to at least give them the thought that they have many choices that they could make, because there are many choices in the open world. And then hopefully they go and they settle on their plan and they do it.
Yeah, for my part, my campaign, I have all of my players have been drafted, coerced into a crusade to retake a city that has been plunged into a mystical darkness. And it's basically a gigantic mega dungeon. And they're all criminals, and they are going to receive a pardon if they participate in this sort of retaking of the city. So they have the freedom to go and back and shop and rest and whatever, but they need to be crusading, or else they're gonna get clapped back in irons. So that's the sort of like the poker that keeps them moving. My hope is that as they delve deeper, they will have more freedom to explore and find out more. But initially, they've basically got a saber at their back, and they're like, get in there. So I have deliberately, for my campaign, removed a lot of decision making so that from myself and from the players, so that we can get going quicker, because my experience with most gamers, with most of my players, is indecision is a killer. And so I deliberately designed this campaign, and I deliberately started the open table game to, in many different ways, eliminate any chance for quibbling and deliberation, and just make a very clear, this is what you need to do, get to it.
Well, that's really interesting to me, because even once they decide on things, then there's still going to be endless arguments over how to go about.
I can't
tackling the
ever
challenge.
remove the quibbling. And once they get into the dungeon, there will be endless discussions about where to go and what to do. But I just want to make sure that they're pointed in one direction so that I can plan for that.
So my favorite situation is that there are kind of two extremes of gamers. There are the assiduous planners, and then there are the chaos goblins.
I'm a chaos goblin,
the
but all my players
assiduous
are assiduous planners. Yeah,
right. So the planners sit there and they make a plan, and while they're making their plan, the chaos goblin sneaks off and immediately ruins the plan.
yes.
And
This is fun. Yeah.
Well, this is fun, except when it's not. It's fun for me. Maybe the assiduous planners aren't so happy.
Right,
But
right.
anyway, that's a digression.
To summarize, it sounds like a very useful thing to do in open tables is to have just some kind of organization or like a group the players are members of. Like, okay, we're a group of this like convict legion. We're a member of this mercenary company. Right? You don't have to do this, but it kind of helps with the, okay, well, why are there random people here sometimes? And what is our goal? What is the thing we have to do at the beginning of every campaign? It's go make money. It's to explore the next solar system, et cetera, sail our ship to the next island.
Completely agree. I think because part of the problem is in a truly open world with no direction given to the players, endlessly creative players will come up with character motivations that are often not at all coherent or synchronous. And so you'll find that you don't really have a party because they don't all want to do one thing. And by the way, that's a super important part of an open table game, is to have mechanisms and strategies to avoid splitting the party. The split party is the bane of many a game. But in an open table game, you really want to avoid the situation where two people say, I'm going to run off and do this, and then everyone else is sitting there twiddling their thumbs. No. You've got to figure out ways to either out of character say to the players, hey, look, we really need to minimize how much of that we do, or come up with some nasty GM in-game way to penalize them for doing that. You want to keep them together, herded in more or less the same direction.
The party's already split, right? This is already a fraction of the party, right? The people sitting here. There's other people off doing other things. Okay, starting, the last S, stopping. How do you end a session of an open table game?
So as I said, I don't really spend a whole lot of time trying to tie the whole thing off in a nice, neat bow. Often when players are like, oh, man, I'm getting hungry, I want a break, then I'll say, okay, fine. After you spend the rest of the day getting back to town, let's spend a few minutes dividing up loot and doling out experience, because in my games we do level the characters and they persist from con to con. And Tales of the Iron League does advance characters relatively quickly compared to other systems. So people are excited about the possibility of maybe their characters getting buffer quicker. Anyway, definitely there's an aspect of, identifying our magic items and doling them out and splitting up gold and maybe doing a little bit of shopping and leveling up your character. And then, people can go. And that needs to be super quick, especially in the con setting, because often people look at their watch and say, oop, my next game starts in 5 minutes, gotta go. And I say, okay, fine, let's dole out your experience and your money real quick. I'll take your character sheet, off you go.
This is another reason why, to me, system is important and why I'm excited to run it in Shadowdark. I'm very much for this S, I am very much speculating. My game ended very naturally when I wanted it to last time, so I haven't had to really struggle with this. But Shadowdark has this mechanic for carousing, where you basically go back and spend your money on, booze and gambling and whatever, to gain experience and all that. And so I imagine that, once we're 5-10 minutes out from the end, I'll be like, great, this is as far as you go. You head back to town. Let's do some carousing rolls, and then we'll pick up next time. That is even if it means like you gotta sort of hand wave, you get out of the dungeon or whatever, that's okay with me. We're just gonna sort of narratively say, yeah, you make it back and you drag that guy's body the whole way. It's fine. We'll figure it out.
But you don't have to do that. If you wanted to, for instance, do kind of a dedicated hex crawl campaign where they're exploring and they've got out to the far point of the map and they don't want to start over again, you could say, okay, you plop down and you make camp, and we will start over again next time from that camp with whatever players show up, and we just won't care that it's different people this time. And yeah, you can do it either way. But I do find that there's a lot of advantage to having that kind of Star Trekian episode in a bottle sort of approach, where it kind of begins and ends more or less the same way.
We've gone through our 5 S's: setting, system, scheduling, starting, and stopping. I have like some just random other questions as the open table outsider that I would like us to quickly get to before we have to head back to our safe space base. So like if I come to an open table game and I come like almost every week, and then I have a friend who only comes like every like 5th week, won't I be higher level than them? How do you handle like different disparities in either character experience, power, or knowledge? Do you hand wave it? Do you keep track of it? What do you do?
So the nice thing about the communication aspect of the game is that player knowledge is not necessarily held by the players who are there all the time. If you have a good means of communication, even the players who don't play as much are kind of tapped into that vein of information. So at least on an outer character basis, their character knows the stuff that other characters know. But you're right, there can be these gross disparities of experience level, and certainly it's a very weird situation when I've got a bunch of 7th level players, and then suddenly a brand new person shows up and wants to start a 1st level character. And yeah, you can totally have these odd situations, but in those situations, I find that often my higher level player are like super solicitous of their fragile youngling, and do their best to kind of marshal them through the dangerous stuff without them getting themselves killed super easy. Although, honestly, some people don't want to be sheltered like that. Some people are like, yeah, I'm going in there. I'm going to stab that dragon in the neck. And yeah, okay, cool. Right on. That is a vital part of an open game system, by the way, is it should be super easy to get another character. Because,
right.
There may very well be, in a sandboxy type game, there may very well be areas of the map that are more dangerous than others. And if people stumble into them at the wrong time with the wrong group of people, there is definitely a potential for a TPK when the wrong thing happens at the wrong time. And, I think everyone needs to be okay with that. And one of the ways that it can be okay is for you to have a stack of pre-generated characters to give people to continue on right away.
Yeah, this is something I'm curious about. And like I have said, I'm very much at the beginning, so I haven't had a chance to resolve this conflict. But I'm going to try to play this straight. If you show up and everybody else is level 5, here's one of the level 1 adventurers who's been hanging out in town. Good luck. And my hope is that they will, the higher level players will try to keep that person alive so they can reach the end of the session and probably gain a bunch of experience and loot. But also it might be fun for that level 1 person to, just charge headfirst into a dragon's jaws and good luck. Here's your next guy. I'm trying to let my players figure this out. I think that there's a way for this to be fun. I'm going to see whether or not that is the case.
Cool. So, Matt, what other questions do you have? Would you like to hear about the 6 L's?
Yeah.
No.
Andy's saying I'm constantly taking L's. 6 of them, in fact. Well, obviously, you both know my greatest fear in life and in role-playing games is ever offending anyone or ever anyone thinking I'm not a good, special, nice boy. What about the like social considerations? Like we got like, okay, maybe we have a pool of 10 people, only 5 can play. Like, is someone getting not fast enough on their email because they're like working a stressful job? Like, how do I handle always being a good and special boy and no one ever being mad at me?
I struggle with this too, Matt, and I'm very curious about Andy's take, but like I made sure to really like set my expectations like very clearly, or set everyone's expectations very clear at the beginning. My first session, we had a bunch of deaths. I told them to expect that. It was a funnel. It was a gauntlet. I told them that, hey, listen, this is the only, once we reach this number of people at the table, I'm cutting it off. So far, it has not been a problem. We will see, but I am making very, very clear to be like, hey, this is not like my other games, or this is not like maybe your normal game. I think it'll still be fun, but this is what you need to expect, and hopefully we can still all enjoy that.
So having run a lot of con games, I found that having interpersonal conflicts at the table is, I think, more frequent than I experience in home games. Often the people in home games are friends by other means, whereas the people you could be playing with at a con game could be complete strangers. And so the type of friction situations that arise there, it just seems like it's more frequent. Don't drink too much coffee, and take half a Xanax before you start your session. Just, you do want to have kind of a relatively calm mindset. But yes, a big part of your job as a GM in that setting is to be kind of to grease the social wheels and to be a diplomat as much as a storyteller and figure out ways to make everyone get along well and play together. We were talking about the Chaos Goblin versus Planner conflict, and in one convention game, it led not to blows, but to a fairly strenuous argument that led to someone getting up and leaving. And that was kind of an extreme case. I've never actually had anyone, flip the table or anything like that. But, there have definitely been situations where I felt like my ability to kind of manage groups of people was challenged. And I don't know what to tell you. Being a manager trains you well for being a GM in a convention type setting, because you're going to get all kinds of people. You're going to get people who are somewhat on the spectrum and aren't super good at communicating with other people in a social setting. You're going to get people who are just jerks and are totally self-involved. And you're going to get people who want to hog the spotlight and, role play on endlessly with their character while everyone else is kind of rolling their eyes. And so it's your job as a GM in each one of those situations to kind of step in and say, okay, that's enough of yours. Let's move on. Let's do something else. And I don't know how to teach that. I think that's something you just got to do.
All right. I think just like last question, if you've listened to this conversation and you think, oh, hey, the open table, this sounds like something I want to try out in my like local gaming scene. Any other final thoughts on like how to get started, other than just do it?
Well, I mean, just do it is pretty great. But I would say one cool way to do it would be to poll your group of friends or people who you think are likely participants in this, and try and get some ideas for game settings that are likely to grab them. It's obviously going to be much better, and you're going to get a better response if you're running a game that your likely pool of participants are going to be interested in playing in. And so, you don't have to just have a setting set in your head and you're going to say, that's it. That's what the open world is, and like it or lump it. You don't have to do that. You can kind of make it sort of an interactive build process with everyone. And then from there, it's kind of your baby. But at least that initial process of initial kind of planning and planting the seeds for what will grow into your game world, that can be a more group interactive thing.
I'm actually going to say that if I had a chance to do this again, I did this because I had a group of people that I was pretty sure I could a large enough body that I could make this work. If I wanted to just try it, I would do it at a con, like Andy has suggested. If I want to just see like, hey, is this for me? I would set it up and do it, a few days in a row and just run it at a convention nearby. That would be, to me, a fun way to see if this is something I want to do.
Another fine option, your friendly local neighborhood gaming store often has gaming space, and that what can often be a thing, as long as it takes a little bit of guts to get up the nerve to do this. But if you are willing to go and introduce yourself to whoever owns the store and say, hey, I'm interested in running a running game here on Tuesday nights here in your store, and anyone who wants to show up can drop in and do it, then often you can leverage the help of the game store person to advertise it, to buttonhole people, customers, as they come by and say, hey, there's a game going on over there on Tuesday nights. And that can help drive up your pool of players immensely.
Open table, just do it. It'll be fun, maybe. Hey, you won't have to worry about scheduling anymore. Just your own schedule.
You don't have to worry as much about scheduling.
Yeah, as much. Andy, thanks for coming on the show. Link in the show notes to the Tales of the Iron League version, 0.999. A great rules light, but like with a little bit of like fun character building stuff. Hey, if you're like, oh, I liked Labyrinth Lord or I like Shadow Dark, I really hate that there's not like a single special thing my character can do. This one has that. I like that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Please check out ironleague.org. Links will be provided.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. If you have questions about open tables or anything else, drop us a line at dmofnone@gmail.com.
Thanks for coming on, Andy. It was really great to talk with you. And thanks for listening, everybody. And whatever you do, keep rolling them dice.
Thanks so much. I am DM Andy.
Okay, yes, I'm still DM Matt. Yeah, actually, you're not DM Andy. This is a special open table correspondent.
Yeah,
Andy.
Premier DM of None open table correspondent Andy. All right, everybody.
Just if you have any more questions, actually, just show up at one of Andy's games. All links to his where he is playing at all times in the show notes.